Hello, welcome, Tessa. How are you?
I'm doing good. How are you, Francesco?
I'm great, thank you. First of all, thanks very much for coming onto my channel for this interview. And I couldn't find much about you, so I'm very excited to ask you some questions about your background and in trading and other things. So, would you like to introduce yourself briefly to our listeners?
Sure. I'm Tessa Dao. I'm currently a co-host and producer on the Chat with Traders podcast, along with Ian Cox, our main host doing most of the interviews. Um, for those who don't know, the podcast was originally founded by Aaron Fifield, who stepped down as host to focus on full-time trading. So I'm also a trader. Although recently I've had to put my trading on a little pause as I step into this role as a co-host and producer, and also building a new community. But I am an options trader.
Thank you. That's a great introduction there, Tessa. So my first question then is exactly about that, which is uh, when and how did you get interested in trading and finance?
That's a good question. It wasn't planned for sure. I began my trading, I'm sorry, I began my career in accounting and finance. So mainly my career has mostly been in corporate finance, more like the financial planning, analysis, budgeting, forecasting, and things like that. Um, so I got into corporate finance due to, circumstances that led me there, but it certainly wasn't my first choice, neither was it my second or third. And so I wanted a way to get out of corporate finance. And so I stumbled upon stock trading initially in 2009. I had a coworker who was trading stocks while she was working. And so I, approached her one day and said, "What are you doing?" And so she was sharing with me how excited she was about making money trading stocks. And how she shared about turning $1,000 into $40,000. This was back in around 2009. And of course, I was really fascinated and intrigued by it. I didn't know anything about trading stocks. So she shared with me a little. And then about a year later, I asked her how she was doing, and she said she lost all her money. And so I was like, oh my gosh, is it that like, you know, volatile, trading stocks? And how can you go from making so much money to losing everything? And so, but I was still fascinated. So um, I wanted to learn more about it. And so I took some vacation time and started to learn, enrolled in some stock trading classes and learned about it because I really wanted to know, like, could this be a potential way for me to, you know, uh, get out of my job, right? Basically. Um, and so, yeah, I learned. So I initially traded stocks, but ended up trading options about 5 years later in 2014. That's when I discovered options trading.
Thank you. That's great. In fact, you kind of answered my second question, which is kind of how you sort of got into trading through somebody, which is obviously your co-worker, and um, and then you went onto a course. So that kind of told me about that as well. And so that sort of in a way answers that question. Although you could kind of say that there's more to it, right? Because you probably looked at, I imagine some maybe videos on YouTube. Did you read any
Oh yeah.
books? Was there anything that?
There's a lot more. I mean, beyond, okay, so I took I paid for that course the first time, in learning how to day trade. So I paid for that course for 1 week. It was intensive and it was really interesting, but very thorough, very intensive. But it's different when you take a course and then you have to go on your own and try to trade. That's a different story. Um, but I continue to do some um, self-learning. I mean, I learned, I researched, I discovered a lot of free resources on YouTube and things like that on trading. But when I started to get into options, that's when I really got more serious. And I yes, there's a lot of free resources out there, but to have some skin in the game, I I found out that I really need to pay, even if it's expensive. I need to pay, put some skin in the game so that I will learn. And so I did. I enrolled in, I don't want to name that company, but I enrolled in this options, pretty popular options program, pretty expensive. I paid for it and I had like few months to like I think I only had like 2 or 3 months to finish it. Otherwise I would lose it, the courses and everything. So I did, I finished it, I paid for it, and I started to in 2014, that's when I started to just um, focus on trading. I actually quit my job, believe it or not. So in 2014, I said, I need to put skin in the game. I need to, I need to quit my full-time job to show how serious I am about this. And so I did. I quit my job and then just focused on trading.
And so, did you how was your trading at the beginning? Did you sort of bust any accounts, or did you have any, like your co-worker? Do you have like a good start and then some lot? How was it at the beginning? I mean,
It was perfect at the beginning. I never busted anything. Just kidding. No, I'm kidding. Like everyone else, right? It's really rough, the first steps. And I of course I've busted my accounts. I mean, I'm not proud to say I've busted my savings, I busted everything I had. Um so and part of that too was because I had a lot of pressure on myself. I quit my full-time job at the time, and yes, I did have savings, right? I had enough savings that I put aside so that I knew that I would need that, right? So I had savings, but I also had credit cards and but I that was part of the problem was the pressure was so much on trying to make money. Um so you're learning, but at the same time you have this pressure, and so you're pressured to like learn quick, and you're pressured to perform quickly. So that was uh a way that I really busted my account. And then and I when I reopened it again, I busted it again, and it was like two kinds of losses. I busted it big time, like the first time, losing everything. And then I was able to put in more capital, but then I started dying slowly. I didn't bust, but I started dying slowly, steadily and slowly. I underestimated the dangers of leverage as well, and and underestimated like how important it was to have a process and strategy that you have to back test and refine. And I didn't know how to take enough risk, and I also didn't know how to, you know, um, incorporate risk management early on, and not having anyone to really like bounce my ideas off of and talk about it enough. I didn't know, many people around me that traded, and even if they did trade, they didn't trade the way I did. So it's just a combination of things that led to kind of, you know, the destruction in my accounts. Um, yeah, so that was kind of my start of my trading.
I'm sorry to hear that. And sometimes in these interviews, I don't know if you get this feeling from chat with traders, but it almost feels like we're doing therapy, uh,
Mm.
because there's a lot of loss. Every trader has this soul destroying. I mean, it is. really as bad as it gets when the loss is big enough to matter. Like you said, it's real money that you could have done something with. Um,
Yeah.
and it's a big thing, and we carry it because often, especially retail traders, we're not working to trade for somebody. We are trading our own money, sometimes in isolation. So it's really on you. You go outside feeling dreadful, but you can't share it with anybody. It's like a dirty secret. Something dreadful has happened
Hmm.
to you. You can't share with anybody. You just have yourself to blame. It's not even like you have an accident when it's quite spectacularly bad that at least there's a wreckage, and it's just so almost an invisible thing. Money, digital money, it goes. It's like going to play roulette. You go in with money, you leave without. Nothing's changed in the world. Nobody knows except you, and it's really dreadful to carry that by yourself. So that's why
Yeah.
I feel it's like therapy when I talk to other traders. It's this kind of um, you could go really deep and actually unearth a lot of
Right.
pain that's been bottled up because you can't share it. Yeah, it's
Yes.
definitely something, isn't it, that we all go through. And if somebody
Yes.
says, "I've never, no, never had any losses," you'll be like, wait a second here. So
Right.
no true trader has never lost anything. Which takes me actually to another question because it kind of links with that, which is, can you tell us about your trading process? You, whatever you want to tell us. I mean, trading secrets here, but how do you trade now?
Hmm. Yeah. So like I mentioned earlier, I started off trading stocks, but I didn't like the risk when whenever the stock gaps up or down like really big and it misses, even if I have like a stop in place, a stop order in place, if the gap is large enough and it misses your stops, right, then you're screwed. And so I learned that early on. I go, I don't like that kind of risk. I just don't like that kind of trading. So that triggered me to find a better way to manage this risk, which led to the discovery of options trading. So I started off simply with, just using options as a hedge or insurance. So I would buy like a long put to protect my long stock option. It's like buying insurance for your car or your house for a set period of time. So that option, the protective option, um, protective put, for example, gives me like it allows me, like if my stock goes against me, it gave me the ability to sell the stock at a set price, as long as it's on or before the expiration. So that means like no matter how low my stock goes, I can still sell the stock for the agreed upon price. So that was my initial way of trading because I was still trading stocks, but I wanted a way to hedge to protect my position. But then and by the way, I personally think that everyone who trades stocks should at least learn how, options work at the basic level and maybe, to use it as a hedge. I just think that's important. Um, but through more, exploration and experimentation, I discovered over time that there's just so much more to trading options than just using it as a hedge or, insurance. And it's also has to do with my personality. I mean, I enjoy the challenge and the complexity and the creativity that comes with trading options. So, like, okay, so just at a high level, because we don't have that much time, but at a high level, I'll explain how I trade. Um, I utilize an options earning strategy. So basically, I trade around earnings, earning seasons. Um, and why do I do that? Because the reaction to earnings results can cause, large moves in a stock up or down. So that's the catalyst for my strategy. And there are so many ways to trade, stocks around earnings, but basically I set up multiple, like a complex option strategy, with multiple legs to take advantage of earning moves, whether it goes up, down, or sideways. And I do that going into earnings, like a few weeks before earnings, and then I have an option, I mean, a strategy on earnings day, and then also the after earnings reaction as well. So my typical hold time is anywhere between 2 weeks to 2 or 3 months maximum. I'm not a day trader. It's at least two weeks to 2 or 3 months. And but the challenge I have is that in the strategy is that I've got to be right, in my direction before it expires, the option expires. And so if it looks like I'm not going to be right by the time the option expires, I need to either let it just, the losses happen um, as part of my strategy because, losses are part of my strategy, or adjust the position by replacing or rolling out the options with another one. So, but what attracts me, to trade around earnings is because you have opportunities every quarter because companies, they disclose their earnings results or reports every quarter. So you have every quarter, I can select, the underlying stock for my option strategies based on, in my case, in my strategy, based on the liquidity, the volume, the implied volatility, the price. And I developed over time, I started off very discretionary, like trading, making discretionary decisions. But over time, I have discovered that I need to be systematic in my approach to my strategy, systematic in terms of, and I don't mean systematic like algorithmic, or anything like that, but more systematic in terms of having logic to my strategy and following the rules of my strategy because options by itself is complicated enough. It's already complicated, but then you have to have, because there's so many moving parts to options trading that you have to be really organized. You have to, you've got to have your rules in place. And being systematic like really takes practice because we're humans, we're not robots, right? um we it takes practice, and it's not easy to be systematic. It's just something that you have to really develop over time and keep getting better at it. And so one of my tools to help me with my systematic approach is actually very um it's just very it's nothing like totally high tech. I use Excel. So I use good old Microsoft Excel because that is the tool I'm very comfortable with. um I've been in corporate finance for a long time, so I'm very familiar. I'm comfortable with Excel, building complex models within Excel. So, I've built a very ugly, complex spreadsheet in Excel model that utilizes API to pull in, data from my broker, options chain, from my broker into my Excel sheets. And I incorporate the, options pricing model like Black-Scholes into my tool. So that is part of my that's part of my process is that part of being systematic is having this tool that works for me. And I've I've built it since 2014, and I've refined it over the years. It's still the same concept. It's just, it's been refined and improved over the years. And then journaling is a huge part of my process. Journaling is what turned my trading around from losing to breaking even, to stopping from journaling helped, with starting to, helping you to reflect, and it helped to find out where your weak points are and your strengths are, and and what works and what doesn't. And so over time, I find that journaling is like the key thing to helping you understand your strategy inside and out, and to improve in your process. And so that's part of the Excel as well. I know it's weird, but I journal in my Excel. I used to do it in Word and I experiment and like that's no, I need it in Excel because that works for me. So that's a big part of my process too, in my strategy is the journaling. You have to, it's very boring, but it's I'm going to borrow this quote that I heard from Sunny Harris. She's one of the guests that I interviewed. She said, "If it's not boring, then you're doing something wrong. If it's boring, then you're doing something right in your process, right?" So that's what I remember. Yeah.
Thank
So
you.
that's sort of my process.
That's great. Thank you very much. That really went into all the detail, and so if people have any questions, they can maybe reach out to you because I'm sure there are lots of things in there
Sure.
that we could pick on that I personally would be interested in. Which leads me to another question because you mentioned the dates sort of remind me that roughly around that time, if I'm not mistaken, Aaron Fifield started the Chat with Traders podcast. So
Oh yeah.
all the way from Australia, and so that people can go and find out. But he basically wanted to do that kind of selfishly, also as a service, because he had a bit of kind of broadcast knowledge as to how to set up a podcast, and he wanted to meet other traders, but couldn't find anybody. Correct me if I'm wrong, right? Because I'm just quoting from, and I remember that he basically just did it out of a way to, and probably got lots of rejections to start with, but gradually started getting more and more people from the industry to agree to come to this podcast, and he got some really big names, and it kind of grew and grew past the 100 episodes, 200, and it's still going now thanks to you and Ian.
Yeah.
And so did you come across that podcast? So when did you come across it? Did it make any difference to you kind of hearing those interviews? How did you come across it basically? What was the start?
Sure. Yes. I stumbled across it on the internet back in 2015. And that was around the time that I was, about a year after I started trading options. And I was actively in the, also exploring, in the exploring mode in trading, finding out, about other traders and things like that. And back then, podcasts were a relatively novel thing, I think. So I started listening to several trading related podcasts, in addition to Chat with Traders. Chat with Traders was one of them. And I just immersed myself listening to the guests on the show, sharing their trading experiences. And it was so eye-opening, especially when it comes to the topic of trading psychology. I was really drawn to that. And the topic of losses, losing, and also the topic of building a process, and treating it like a business. So those were the kinds of topics that really drew me in those interviews. And because trading is so lonely, and I had no one to really discuss it with, and so the podcast was one of my ways of learning and staying immersed, in the trading world. But there were times when I got into the cycle of just listening and listening, and then I felt like so stuck. Like I knew it felt good to listen to all these episodes, but then I was like, I'm still stuck and I don't know how to move forward. It's like it sounds great and everything, but I'm still like I don't know what to do. Um anyway, that is how I first heard about Chat with Traders, through my own kind of exploring on the internet.
Thank you. And so moving on, if people don't know, obviously you're currently co-host and producer on the show, and so it's a very
Yeah.
important. So how did that sort of, or what's your current? Tell us a little bit about how that looks on like your day with Chat with Traders. What kind of things you're doing with the show, and
Yeah. So in addition to being a co-host with Ian Cox, who is the main interview on the show, my role is also to focus on building a community for primarily the Chat with Traders listener base, but also to open it up to the wider trading community. Like I said, because trading is such a lonely journey for most traders, and I really think it doesn't have to be. Our community helps to make the journey less lonely, where you can connect with others. and have more meaningful discussions than in the typical social media platforms out there. And one of the things that makes the community different is that there's a strong focus on accountability in one's trading journey. So the accountability is what I see that's missing in a lot of traders, and for myself included, um, because we're doing it by ourselves, but it's hard to be accountable to yourself, right? You can try, but you know, it's hard. So that's the thing about the community, is that the accountability is rooted in this community, and in turn it makes the community more purposeful. So that's kind of my role right now, is helping to build that, and it's to help other traders. I'm first and foremost a trader advocate too. I want to advocate for traders, especially beginner traders. And I think that's the reason why I think this community is so important.
Thank you. That's great. I was thinking like if you had a problem, or let's say you had a weight problem or something like that, and you had to go and be accountable to a small community, and get your weight checked, and everybody
Mhm.
shares whether they've lost weight or they've fallen into bad ways between meetings and not kept up with their promises. It's that kind of thing, isn't it? You can always say, "Oh, I'll just have a relapse, small relapse, and then you can cake binge or something." I'm just saying there are ways
Yeah.
to help by sharing that, as you say, and that's really important as well. You don't have a risk manager sitting next in the next room. You are everything. You're executing trades,
Yeah.
and it's quite, and probably having a life on top of that, which has nothing to do with trading sometimes. So it's like,
Yeah.
you can go, well, I'll just I'll just relax about my stops now. And anyway, thank you so much. I have to move on because I have one or two questions which are sort of related but kind of on the side. um Tessa, here's my question, which is, um I've sort of asked this question before, which is, that there is a sort of a fit in terms of the trader profile, which tends to be male, full stop. And so, have you sort of been in the online space, feeling that there's any kind of resistance to you being a woman, or I mean, maybe not, but or do you have any thoughts on why that is, that
Mhm.
statistically there are less women traders? And yeah, any thoughts on that, or if you want to share any thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, in my experience, how I see it, when I took over the podcast, and in terms of the podcast, I was actually kind of apprehensive a little bit about it, in the sense that I'm going outside of my comfort zone. That's one thing, but I also knew that the trading space and community is made up mostly of men. And I was worried that maybe the podcast audience would not like really receive me in a positive way. And some actually have been, vocal about the change. But then I thought, change is just naturally hard for people, no matter your gender, your race, your background. So um, that's how I see it. And I, here I am coming into the podcast. I'm this unknown, Asian American female with, a feminine sounding voice. And, I've heard from unsolicited feedback that it made some people feel very uncomfortable, and that it's even a distraction. I even had a woman, not a man, but a woman email me and said basically she wasn't comfortable with me, basically being the co-host, and she didn't like my voice. And it's very interesting, um but I realized that there's not much that I can do about that aspect, but to only continue to focus on my purpose, right? I am first and foremost, like I mentioned earlier, a trader advocate, and we want to showcase, talented traders, but we also want to share through our guests the realities and the ugly side of trading as well, and to help address, the false perceptions or expectations in trading. And I hope that our audience can look past the other things, what the host may sound like or look like or whatever, but instead, appreciate what we're trying to bring to the table, through our work over time. And your question regarding, you know, women, I think I think you asked the question before about how come there's not many women in trading.
Mm.
I think there are many reasons for that, and people have different opinions on this. But I brought this up in an episode with Sunny Harris before, and my theory is based on just my own experience, is that women tend to be more risk averse than men in general. That's what I feel like I am, but I could be wrong for other women. But of course, there are, exceptions, and I think women are also more process oriented. At least I am. I do enjoy the process and journey of something rather than like just, taking risks right away and things like that. Um, so that's why you might see more women on the investment side of finance rather than trading. So, you know, we're smaller in numbers right now, but I truly believe that that's going to change. And Francesco, I really commend the work that you're doing right now to let more voices, be heard in the realm of trading. So I'm really glad you're doing this.
It's a drop in the ocean, but one can but try. Thank you for that answer. That's great. And I also wanted to, because we have only a few minutes left, to finish by asking you what words of advice you might have for people. This is your big moment, like no, because you said you're a trader advocate as well. And what what words of advice would you have for people who start out in trading?
Okay. First of all, okay, so sure. My approach is more to share, more than to give advice. So I would share this. Trading is messy, especially in the beginning. It's going to be messy, and because you for newer traders, you're trying to learn and figure things out at the same time, right? It's tempting to compare yourself to others, and so you want to meet yourself where you are at in your own journey and then go from there. And you're going to try different strategies. It's part of the process of trial and error. You're going to find something that works more for your personality and style than other things. And losing money is part of the process. Losing money goes with trading, similar to expenses as being part of running a business. There's unnecessary expenses and there's necessary expenses in business. Well, in trading, there are unnecessary losses that could have been avoided, but then there are losses that are a normal part of trading because you followed your plan. It's part of your strategy and you can take the losses. But risk management is key, though, in the beginning, especially. If I can go back in time, I would have put more importance on risk management, and to get in the habit of applying risk management at all times, right? So it will prevent you from blowing up your entire account so that you can stay in the game to have the chance of learning, doing, forgiving yourself, picking yourself up back up when you fail, and then doing it again. And I think that's important.
Thank you. And to go with that, so uh, we have just a minute left. But where do you see yourself in 5 years' time with chat with traders or with trading yourself?
In 5 years, I hope to say that I'm still trading options and consistently profiting. That's what I'm working towards. I'm a work in progress. I'm not looking to have income from options trading as my only source of income because that's just me. I like to do different things, and in a way, it's like diversifying. So yes, thank you for the question.
That's great. That wraps up. Thank you so much for your time, Tessa, today. And if people want to reach out to you, can they get in touch with you in some way? What would you recommend?
Yes, they can get in touch with me on my Twitter account, um, at Tessa_Dao.
Great. Thanks again for your time, Tessa. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Francesco.
Bye.